Hello, if you clicked into this video, you are cooked, because today we're going to talk about Magdalena Solís, one of the most disturbing serial killers in the history of Mexico. With that being said, enjoy. It's the 1960s. Two brothers, Santos and Cayetano Hernandez, small-time criminals, who would only survive by going town to town scamming people. And at some point in their criminal career, they came across with a brilliant and ambitious idea, one that would solve all their problems and would finally make them rich, scam an entire village. After looking around for the right opportunity, they finally found the perfect village. Deep in rural northern Mexico, there is a small village called Yerba Buena, a place far away from the big cities and so isolated that news, laws, and even reality rarely reached it. In Yerba Buena, most villagers would work in agriculture, and most of them couldn't even read or had never traveled outside their region. They were vulnerable, desperate, and waiting for hope. And that's when the Hernandez brothers arrived. They claimed they were prophets sent by the ancient gods. And in a town like Yerba Buena, with no reason to doubt anyone, the villagers fell right into the trap. Since the villagers were extremely poor, the brothers promised that the gods would bring gold, health, prosperity, and protection, but only if the villagers followed their orders. They also staged fake miracles, hiding items and finding them, using smoke, chanting, and drugs to make rituals seem real, making loud noises or throwing things to scare the villagers, claiming they could curse anyone who disobeyed. And the villagers believed them because they had never seen anything like it. The brothers started demanding money, food, labor, and women, and called it spiritual tribute. So, with cheap magic tricks, they convinced the villagers that the gods spoke to them, that they were chosen prophets, preparing Yerba Buena to become a sacred kingdom. And anyone who questioned them was punished by divine curses. But the brothers had a problem. At some point during the scam, their miracles were running out. Their lives were getting harder to maintain. They needed something bigger, something that would keep the villagers under control. So they went to Monterrey and brought back a woman who would take their scam and turn it into something much darker. Her name was Magdalena Solís. Magdalena was born in the early 1940s in Tamaulipas, Mexico, into a world already stacked against her. She grew up in a place where schools were scarce, jobs were non-existent, and children learned early that survival wasn't guaranteed. Her family lived on the edge of the criminal world, and her environment taught her one thing: to survive, you must become someone others fear. She didn't have stability. She didn't have affection. What she did have was a growing sense of bitterness. The most influential person in her childhood wasn't a teacher or a parent. It was her older brother, Eliezer. And Eliezer was no role model. He was involved in petty crime, prostitution operations, intimidation, extortion, and he didn't hide any of it from her. Instead, he pulled Magdalena into the world he knew. She learned fast. She learned how to manipulate, read people, and use their fears against them. And soon, the line between survival and exploitation disappeared. By her teenage years, Magdalena was known in certain circles. She wasn't innocent. She was dangerous. Her brother used her in prostitution networks, but something unexpected happened. Magdalena noticed how men acted around her, how they listened, how they obeyed, how easy it was for her to control them. She wasn't just working the system, she was mastering it. Her charm wasn't soft and sweet, it was predatory, magnetic, unsettling. She became the kind of woman who could stare into your eyes and make you feel like she saw something in you that no one else did. That was her early power. Most stories of women forced into such lives follow one pattern: they break. But Magdalena didn't break. She turned psychological wounds into tools. She realized she had influence. Men feared losing access to her. People feared disappointing her. She learned that the strongest form of power is the one people give you willingly. And that idea, the intoxicating idea of being obeyed, worshipped, adored, stayed burning in her mind. When the Hernandez brothers were looking for a goddess to keep their cult alive, they wanted a woman who could act, seduce, intimidate, and perform rituals without fear. But they miscalculated. They didn't just find a woman who could play the role. They found a woman who wanted to become the role. Someone already shaped by pain, hunger for control, and a lifetime of surviving by manipulating others. So when they brought her to Yerba Buena and introduced her as the reincarnated goddess Coatlicue, the Aztec Mother of Earth, Magdalena didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, she lifted her chin, and she accepted the worship as if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment. What the brothers didn't know was, they weren't creating a goddess. They were unleashing one. This is when Yerba Buena transformed from a forgotten village into a living nightmare. Night after night in torchlit caves, Magdalena held rituals. Villagers knelt before her as she stood covered in red paint, smoke swirling around her like a serpent. And then, the first sacrifice. A villager who dared to question her divinity. He was beaten, cut, drained. His blood collected in a ceremonial cup. Magdalena drank it. Her followers drank it. That moment sealed everything. The cult believed the goddess needed blood to stay pleased. And Magdalena, hungry for control, power, and attention, demanded more. Victims included villagers, outsiders, and even members of the cult itself. Some bodies were never found. Some were too mutilated to identify. Yerba Buena had turned into a kingdom of fear, and Magdalena sat on the throne, a throne built on bones. Among the villagers, there was a young man whose name was never documented in official reports, but was referred as the Witness. Well, during a ceremony deep in the hills, the villagers were brought inside a cave. Magdalena stood at the center, her arms painted red, her voice echoing off the stone walls. That night, a man from the village whispered doubts. "This isn't a goddess. This is madness." Magdalena heard him. The cult dragged him forward. The Witness was forced to hold a torch while they beat the man to the ground. Then they slit the man's throat and collected the blood in a ceremonial cup. Magdalena drank first. Then she passed the cup around. The Witness froze. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. And in that moment, he understood. This was no religion. This was murder disguised as worship. He knew if he didn't escape soon, he would be next. His escape wasn't heroic. It was desperate. The next day, while the cult was preparing the caves for another ritual, he slipped away, pretending to gather firewood. He didn't run through the open paths. They were watched. He crawled through brush, climbed through cactus fields, and moved like a wounded animal. Thorns shredded his arms. Sharp rocks bent his toenails back. He moved for hours with no water and almost no sound. Every time he heard footsteps or voices from cult members searching, he held his breath. Some say he hallucinated. Some say he saw figures in the trees. Some say he heard Magdalena whispering his name, even though she wasn't there. By the time he reached the nearest town, he was dehydrated, bleeding, shaking uncontrollably, and barely conscious. He stumbled into a small general store and collapsed on the floor. When he came to, he was surrounded by townspeople and a local policeman. He tried to explain. "They're killing people, drinking blood. The goddess, she's not human." Most of them thought he was drunk or insane. His voice cracked. He couldn't form sentences. He cried while talking. But one man listened. Officer Luis Martínez. He saw the cuts, the bruises, the terror in the villagers' eyes. Martínez believed him, or at least believed something terrible had happened. He promised to investigate. The Witness begged him not to go alone. But Martínez went anyway. When Officer Martínez went to Yerba Buena, he didn't bring backup. He didn't expect danger. He thought it would be a simple checkup on a strange complaint. But once he got to Yerba Buena, he realized something was horribly wrong. He asked questions. He saw the villagers acting strangely, avoiding eye contact, and he followed the trail deeper into the hills, into the caves. There he discovered the truth. Human remains, ritual altars, scorched symbols on the walls, and cult members preparing for another ceremony. Martínez tried to leave and report it. He didn't make it. The cult captured him, tortured him, and sacrificed him, one of the final victims. His disappearance became the turning point. When the sun went down and Martínez didn't return, everything inside the police station shifted. At first, no one was worried. Martínez had a reputation: young, ambitious, a bit stubborn. People assumed he'd simply pushed further into the hills and lost daylight. The radio operator tried to reach him, but after silence, they tried again. More silence. The officers exchanged looks, not fear, just irritation. Maybe he turned off the radio. Maybe he stopped at a ranch. He'll be back by morning. But morning came, and Martínez didn't. By sunrise, the tone had changed. Martínez's horse had not returned. There were no messages, no sightings, no travelers reporting seeing him in the area. The police chief, a man known for being calm and unshakable, stood in front of the radio desk with his arms crossed, listening to the static. He finally said the words no officer wanted to hear. He should have checked in. If he didn't, something's happened. That's when the fear set in. The station sent 2 patrolmen toward Yerba Buena. When they rode into the village, something felt wrong immediately. The villagers avoided eye contact. Doors shut as they approached. No one wanted to talk. Questions were answered with shrugs or nervous glances. One elderly woman finally whispered, "You shouldn't be here. The hills are not safe." The patrolmen felt chills. They returned to the station with nothing except unease. When the chief heard the report, he ordered a formal search. 6 armed officers, horses, lanterns, rifles, and 2 volunteer ranchers that were familiar with the mountains. They headed toward the caves the escaped villager had described. Hours passed. Then, one officer returned early. His face was white as chalk. He said, "We found blood." The team found blood-stained rocks, clothing scraps, drag marks in the dirt, symbols carved into trees and remnants of ritual fires. They found no body, but the evidence was overwhelming. Martínez hadn't just vanished, he had been taken. The chief didn't wait. He contacted state authorities. The report he sent read, "Officer missing, suspicion of foul play, possible organized criminal activity, immediate support required." This activated something bigger, a coordinated state-level response. Within 48 hours, multiple vehicles rolled into the small rural station. State police, detectives, forensic teams, and mounted officers. They weren't investigating a disappearance anymore. They were preparing for a raid. The chief gathered his team inside the station, maps laid out across the desk. He circled the caves where Martínez's trail ended. "We go in at dawn, no hesitation. We treat this like a hostile group." Every officer in the room felt the weight of that moment. They weren't searching for a missing man anymore. They were going to war against a cult. At sunrise, nearly 24 armed officers headed into the hills. They didn't know what they would find. They expected maybe criminals, smugglers, or kidnappers. They did not expect blood altars. They did not expect ritual sites. They did not expect the remains of multiple people. But when they entered the caves, the truth of Yerba Buena came crashing down. And that was the moment Magdalena's empire began to fall. When the cult leaders were dragged out of the caves, some villagers cried. Some fell to their knees praying. Others finally spoke, for the first time in years, and told police everything. Children clung to their parents. Elders whispered in disbelief. For Yerba Buena, the raid wasn't just an arrest. It was the breaking of a spell that had poisoned the village for months. Magdalena was convicted of 2 confirmed murders, plus several counts of aggravated assault, kidnapping, and ritualistic torture. Although the cult killed more people, Mexican law at the time required direct evidence linking her hands to the murders. So, she received 50 years in prison, effectively life at the time. She never showed remorse. She maintained she was a goddess until the end. Her brother Eliezer was considered her enforcer, accomplice, and co-leader. He also received 50 years in prison. He tried blaming Magdalena for everything, but the court didn't buy it. The Hernandez brothers received around 30 years each. The cult members who participated in beatings and rituals received between 10 and 15 years. But most villagers were not punished. Most of them were considered victims, and Mexican courts recognized they acted under intimidation. So, they were released. If you've made it this far, thank you. And if you enjoyed hanging out with me today, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And don't forget to drop a comment and let me know what you want to hear next.